So in Washington, there's a big debate going on about the next coronavirus relief package. The relief package has been obviously a hot topic for Democrats and Republicans who are wrangling over different topics, including, for instance, extending unemployment insurance or talking about maybe a payroll tax cut, which I think the Republicans favor, although it doesn't seem like Democrats are really into it. But one of the kind of hot items that has been promoted by some Democrats, and Chuck Schumer is one of the ones who's, I think, most kind of hot to trot for this item, is basically rolling back some of the cap that was placed on the state and local tax deduction, the SALT deduction, in the 2017 kind of tax bill that the Republicans put together. What's interesting about this deduction is that it kind of does hit some Democratic constituencies because particularly people in kind of higher income parts of the country generally do count on this deduction in order to kind of not only reduce their personal taxes, but it also kind of frees up more spending for states on some kind of public services. But what's really interesting, what I find personally very interesting about this, is that it really would benefit kind of the wealthier Americans to repeal the cap, because what's interesting is that this was one of the few areas where Republicans actually kind of raised taxes on the wealthy effectively with their 2017 bill, because what this deduction does is it is primarily claimed by like upper middle income people. So the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, which is kind of like a liberal think tank on the economy, pointed out that if you repealed the SALT cap altogether, and I don't know if that's what's going to happen. It may be that they partially repeal, or maybe it won't happen at all. But if they did repeal it altogether, basically 56% of like the benefits of that would go to like the top 1%, right? The bottom 80% of like the American population would get like 4% of the benefits of doing this, right? Because this deduction is generally claimed by people who earn a lot more money because of like the nature of like taxes and how much you owe and localities.
And my understanding is that it's sort of disproportionately sort of a blue state tax. Is that right?
Yeah, I think part of the reason for that is because it tends to be places that's like it's based around like taxes that people pay at the state and local level. So places that will have higher taxes, and New York is a fairly high tax place, not only the city, but I think the state itself. So it kind of makes sense not only as like a Democratic Party thing, like they're protecting these like some of their higher income voters, but also Schumer in particular, just because he represents New York. I think that Cuomo, the governor of New York, has been very outspoken about this tax deduction, and it's really kind of funny that the Democratic Party is like pushing this so hard right now through Schumer, saying that we have to roll this back because it would primarily benefit the upper income set of Americans. I mean, like I said, the bottom 80% is going to get like 4% of the benefit or something. That's what was estimated through CBPP, and I think also they pulled some data from the Tax Policy Center to create that figure. So it seems like Democrats are going to bat for a tax cut for the rich in a way. Although it should be said that the SALT deduction does free up some money for states and localities. Having it in there, it kind of lets them tax more, which means that it will be more money for public services as well in some of these cases. But still, it primarily benefits like upper middle income people or upper class people.
Right. And one of the things that makes this such a big deal is the context, right? Like if it was just a standalone thing that they were if we were not in the middle of a pandemic, right? And they were not in the middle of one of the most high stakes congressional negotiations in history, it would be one thing. But like when you are in the middle of a give and take negotiations like they are right now, every single thing you ask for, either ask for your side or request that they remove on their side, right, is so crucial and so important, right? I mean, Democrats are going to get like maybe 2 or 3 kind of big ticket items in, right? And so the fact that this is one of their main planks that they're asking for is really something, especially considering again the context, right? This is about relief for people who are on the verge of getting evicted from their homes, getting foreclosed on, or even not being able to afford their grocery bill, right? So, I mean, that's sort of like the context is really important here as well, that like they are willing to kind of risk this entire negotiation on something that is really targeting people who aren't really at risk in general, but especially in the middle of this economic crisis.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Another thing is that like whenever they're negotiating these bills, they always have some kind of dollar figure they're trying to hit. They're saying we're willing to spend this much money. One side or another wants that. So everything you put in is going to, it is kind of zero sum at a certain level because you can't just put an unlimited number of priorities. So like CBPP pointed out that like the Joint Committee on Taxation estimated that like the SALT provisions, like repeal would cost like I think $185 billion over like 10 years is what they estimated. Um, and then I think they said that if this was extended through 2025, which is like the last year the cap's in effect under current law, it would cost nearly $600 billion. So like, we're talking about a huge sum of money here that would basically be taking up space that could be filled by other priorities.
I'm looking at a New York Times analysis that's putting it at 137 billion, and to like kind of contextualize it, to like the other things that they're asking for. Democrats are also asking to increase the child tax credit, and that they're asking for 119 billion. Now that is something that's a poverty reduction measure, right? Like that directly impacts poor people, the child tax credit. And so, I mean, that's the comparison, right? Is like, even within this bill, they are allocating more money towards an upper middle class tax cut, right, than to the child tax credit. It's 137 versus 119. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I think some of the Republicans have done a version of this in that I think parts of the White House wanted to see capital gains tax cut, which of course is also fairly ridiculous right now. Would also benefit primarily people who, trade stocks and make a lot of money from stock market, upper class people, upper income people. It does kind of seem like we should have like a national response to everything happening in the economy right now, based around things that are like really focused on the actual way the economy is being reshaped. And like part of that would be like responding to evictions. Part of that would be responding to healthcare. So like there is no legislation. I mean, I think there are some people who called for it, but it hasn't been passed. No one has actually made it so that coronavirus treatment is free, right? Congress had passed some funding for free testing, but a lot of people may not even want to get tested if they think that they can't pay for the treatment, right? They may just say, I'm just going to try to weather it out. Hopefully it's a cold or a flu, and, it's really costly once they diagnose me, and so on and so forth. But we're not paying for people's treatment. I think many of our competitor nations, many other places around the world are paying for people's treatment, right? But that isn't on the table. Instead, you have a party talking about a capital gains tax cut. You have another party talking about this kind of priority for the suburbs and upper class people in the cities. Like it's kind of feels like their pre-existing priorities got thrown in there, and they're having the same debate they would have had 2 years ago.
And the thing
in the
about that
context
is
of
that
this.
right, and the thing about that is that people have sort of come to expect that from the Republican Party, whereas with Democrats, this is sort of playing into that creeping fear that a lot of people, especially on the left, have, that like the Democratic Party is turning into this party of moderate suburban upper middle class voters, right? And that the party is really just not really caring much about inequality as much anymore, not caring about really the working class and the poor and inequality. Which actually kind of reminds me of another recent thing that's obviously not as substantive as this. It's actually pretty superficial, but recently there were some jabs made at the DNC platform, which I think is still being drafted, right? I don't think it's finalized yet.
Yeah, I think there is a draft of it yet. I'm not sure if they voted to approve the entire thing just yet.
And the criticism of it, and again, these are just kind of superficial jabs, but also sort of telling, is that it had the words, it had the word transgender in it more times than it had inequality in the platform, and which is
I think that transgender appears 9 times and inequality appears 6 times.
which again seems like, I think a lot of people could fairly say maybe that's a cheap shot. But again, it's another thing that feeds into those fears, right? That the party is sort of becoming more of a party that is more focused on sort of cultural issues, and if it is focused on economics, it's actually focused on the wrong end of the spectrum. It's focused on kind of upper middle class and suburban voters, right?
Yeah, and there are some proposals by Vice President Biden to raise taxes on upper income earners, but it at some point you have to wonder if like that's the main priority of legislating. Like we see there's an opportunity with every coronavirus bill to raise taxes on or to generate revenues. It doesn't really seem like it's on the table. There's only competing claims for additional tax cuts or tax credits. Right now, what we're seeing in the economy is that there's going to be a lot more consolidation when this is all said and done, right? Like a lot of small businesses basically did not survive the pandemic. They did not survive being shut down. They didn't survive people being unable to work. There's also this like unemployment. There's this fight over unemployment where the Republicans are claiming that the elevated level of unemployment insurance is keeping some people from going back to work, which I think there's probably some truth to it. But it may also have just been the reality that like there wasn't any other type of aid offered. There was a one-time stimulus, for instance. So I think when you combine all these factors together, it's likely that we're going to exit this period with a lot more inequality. And I don't know that there's like an agenda to address that. Like Joe Biden talking about increasing the income tax a few percentage points on the higher income folks. Like I don't know if that's really getting at, for instance, where a lot of people are making their money, because a lot of it's just in wealth now, right? Like it's in consolidation and like non-liquid like assets. And I feel like a lot of that's going to be untaxable, and it's just growing at an astronomical rate, while a lot of other people are losing everything they have. So I don't know that there is an agenda to rise to that reality. And the negotiations happening in Congress so far don't give a lot of confidence in that direction. And also, I think that we've already seen the Republicans kind of. I think the Republicans are already kind of putting themselves into the posture of not accepting too much deficit spending. Even when Trump is in office, like their own party's president's in office, they're already talking about that. So that's something that might roll over into a President Biden next year. And it may be that Biden spends his time in a rearguard position where he's trying to address getting a vaccine to people. He's trying to address some type of back to work programs or something. But he doesn't have a whole lot of bandwidth in terms of spending. And he certainly doesn't have a whole lot of bandwidth in terms of taxing, because I think in Congress, very few people are even proposing any new taxes or anything to control like wealth inequality. And so it does seem to me like this ship is kind of going in that direction, even if, it may be, I think Joe Simonson in the Washington Examiner wrote a piece about this draft platform, noting the fact that transgender was mentioned more than the word tax or more than the word inequality. But it seems like anything that actually requires forcing some of the richest people in the country to sacrifice a little bit more is much more harder to achieve right now in this political climate that we're in. Hi everyone, it's Zed here. Thanks for watching. My friends Leighton and Shant and I launched the Back Channel as a way to add a dose of reality to the insular online discourse that's shaping our politics right now. It's an experiment, and for it to continue, we could really use your support. We've launched a Patreon page at patreon.com/thebackchannel, where you can pledge a small amount to help the show expand and improve. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks for watching.